Hello, my name is Angus McGregor, and today, along with my colleague Eric Hawkinson, both of us from Kyoto University of Foreign Studies, we would like to share with you the early stages of a research project we are currently working on, which is the use of WebVR in the facilitation of Model United Nations simulations. Model United Nations MUN, is an academic simulation where students role play as delegates to the United Nations, working together to solve global issues before the United Nations agenda while representing their assigned country's national interests. A typical MUN event would look something like this. Students are using parliamentary procedures to move in and out of formal and informal consultations with each other. They're delivering speeches, they're debating, and they're workshopping with other delegates to craft together policy proposals to present to the larger caucus. Here in Japan, we're involved with the Japan University English Model United Nations Conference, which is an annual MUN event for about 170 students, both Japanese and international, most of them EFL, or English as a Foreign Language learners. The conference was moved online in 2020 and 2021 as a result of the COVID pandemic. Now, at both online and face-to-face Model United Nations events, in the classroom, outside of the classroom, is a great way to teach global issues, develop public speaking skills, develop more global awareness, and to work on students' research skills. However, what I've noticed is that because students are so concentrated on working on these skills and preparing for an all-English conference, they rarely really develop their negotiating strategies and their ability to agree and disagree in a diplomatic manner. So we were interested in exploring how we could get somewhat from this stagnant video meeting style, which was a great alternative to canceling the event, back to something that resembled, even if in an online environment, more the intimate and personal negotiating situations that appear at a face-to-face Model United Nations meeting. So we decided to keep the simulation small. We went with the United Nations Security Council, which has 15 member nations, and created a replica of the United Nations Security Council chambers there in New York City. We were going to explore, could students negotiate a consensus-building statement? Could they do so while protecting their national interests? And how could the avatar negotiating experience assist them in preparing for a real face-to-face Model UN experience? In keeping it small, we decided to limit our roles to 7 student delegates. 5 would be the permanent members of the Security Council, and then 2 important stakeholders, the director from the United Nations Assistance Mission to Afghanistan and a representative from the former Afghanistan government. The crisis scenario that the students would be working towards crafting a statement about was the United States withdrawal from Afghanistan that had happened this last year in August. The students were tasked with drafting a international statement called an official statement on behalf of the United Nations Security Council. Faculty prepared the background guides and the role objectives for each of the 7 roles, and 3 sessions were organized, an orientation and then 2 meetings. Each of the meetings, students were able to move back and forth from formal and informal consultations using parliamentary rules and procedures. And this is an example of what they did.
China is concerned on how can we all work together and be able to help Afghanistan and the Taliban. China supports all statements that call on the Taliban to follow international governing standards and respect the rights of all citizens, including women and girls, in order to be able to negotiate with the Taliban on aid and the future of China-Afghanistan relations. Therefore, China is willing to work with the Taliban to ensure a smooth transition towards a new government and expresses that the international community will support China's plan to be more involved in developing the Central Asia region and play a more active role in maintaining regional peace and security.
The floor is now open.
President?
Yes, United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. The United Kingdom is in favor of the idea of the United States of having the Security Council in multilateral conversations. Therefore, the United Kingdom is disagree with the idea of having a bilateral conversation with Taliban, which the idea proposed by Russia and China. Thank you. Do we have to build the camps in their neighboring countries and not in our countries? That was because we were concerning about the traveling distance between Afghanistan
Sorry to
and
interrupt. China, I was asking to talk to France. So.
Oh, why France?
Ciao.
So yeah, so we were concerning about the long travel distance between our countries and Afghanistan. So it would be very easier.
So, could students negotiate a consensus building statement? Well, yes, they quickly went about moving around the chambers into the public spaces as also the private meeting rooms. They proposed 16 draft clauses to the statement, and through negotiating with each other, they were able to whittle that down to 11 clauses, which were drafted and then agreed upon later on. Could they do so while protecting their national interests? Well, I think so. Russia and China quickly aligned their interests and called for bilateral negotiations with the Taliban. The US, UK, and France adamantly opposed that, opting to promote multilateral negotiations instead. And how could this experience with the avatar assist in preparing for a face-to-face experience? Well, I think you could see using it as a positive tool. Something that can be utilized as students prepare for online simulations as well as face-to-face simulations, a zone for practicing, if you will, negotiating strategies that they're learning in the classroom. Here are 7 student comments after the event was over, the simulation. I think they were very positive. Students really enjoyed it. They felt it really assisted them in preparing for the Model United Nations.
Hi, my name's Eric, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how we put together this simulation as far as the technology and how we got to build this environment and iterate on it to facilitate these simulations in WebVR. We used A-Frame, which is an extension of HTML that allows the creation of 3D environments using any standard web browser. This makes it very accessible. And so A-Frame is key in facilitating WebVR, and we used a particular built service called FrameVR to host these A-Frame environments. And we built a custom environment using Blender 3D environment that replicated the Model United Nations Security Council chamber for this simulation as well. The students were mostly on laptops, and it was mostly Mac OS users using Safari as a means to access the WebVR. There were a couple of Windows 10 users as well. None of the participants had any experience in WebVR before this, so we had to do some onboarding, train them a little bit about how to move around and interact with things inside of a virtual space using WebVR. That was done in Microsoft Teams. And a lot of what happens as far as the activities go in Model United Nations is the drafting of documents or the putting together of some sort of facilitating some sort of resolution of some sort, and that required, in this case, to use collaborative documents from G Suite. So the actual environment itself, we took some floor plans, took some reference photos, and there's actually a couple of 360 photos out there to actually recreate the environment in virtual space. It wasn't to scale, and it ended up looking a little bit like this, which isn't exactly like the floor plan in real life. We added some rooms to facilitate breakout rooms. We had to adjust the spatial audio to allow for private conversations in these spaces inside of virtual reality, and extra spaces between the chairs and the tables and desks, and an extra kind of floor or two in the lobby to facilitate the facilitators, for example, welcoming people into the space and telling them where to go, and etc. right? So considering just a couple of points moving forward for the next iteration, or ones that we had to deal with while iterating through the process as we went through these simulations for this pilot study, the collaborative document creation in WebVR. So as I mentioned earlier, you have to create resolutions, you have to write documents. That meant leaving VR to actually work on these documents. There were some, in our simulations, there were some people in VR looking at a document being typed up, but you couldn't actually type in the VR environment. I have some other design considerations or possible changes to the actual activity itself to make that more conducive to using virtual reality. That could be moving the drafting portion more asynchronous, or having some sort of pick and choose type scenario where the actual user interface of bringing parts of resolution here, where the people inside of VR could actually pick up and place in, drop in canned items perhaps in the drafting of the resolutions, so that no typing was needed. Audio levels, sometimes you can eavesdrop depending on the spatial audio, so you have to maybe kind of make private zones, for example. Universal design, different levels of technology ability, different technology tools. Some had better bandwidth than others, and also being able to hear and see or actually label items in virtual reality is a constant design issue when trying to think about these environments as well. Access and privacy and data collection are all kind of put into the choice of using WebVR. You're going through the stack of using the browser and knowing where, giving access to your camera and your microphone to that browser. The other issues involved with that, WebVR giving access to people coming in, to people who know that, for example, that where that website is, you have to put up perhaps a login or some sort of block, so you don't get the Zoom bombing equivalent of somebody coming into your VR space. All those considerations and more are talked about in this study and other studies on my website. You can see some other VR environments that we're doing in similar studies. Please visit Together Learning for those environments, and erichawkinson.com for those studies. Thanks, guys. We'll see you in the next one. Bye.